17 years before the Battle of Sekigahara, a letter was written in distress to an old master of the sword, begging and pleading to God that this letter reaches this man. And the urgent message was a request to keep his son Kojiro alive, because war is not kind to anyone. By the grace of the Lord, this old man receives a letter, but no child. And this man was really depressed. After a lifetime of killing and mastering the sword, he has no friends, no family, no purpose. As a result of this reality, this man wanted his life to end. And day after day, he would not eat and just stare into the ocean full of regret. And the thing that ran through my mind was in the book of Ecclesiastes. Solomon made it clear life is meaningless without God. And we see that a lot today. People gather possessions, thinking stuff or status will help, and it only brings emptiness. But one day, when he was rereading the letter that was sent to him, he was wondering if the child would ever show up, thinking the child was killed during the voyage, but almost like a stroke of God's hand, it swept away the letter into the ocean, and the man was shocked and scared because the letter was the only hope he had of loving. And we see baby Kojiro reaching for that same letter when he was washing up the shore on a little boat. But before Kojiro could make it to shore, there was a fatal, huge crashing of waves that caused the boat to be tipped over, and the old man dove headfirst into the water to save the helpless child. And once he saved Kojiro, he realized the true work it took to look after a newborn baby. With his only knowledge, his hands knew was destruction, not life. So to say he went through an adjustment period was a given. But what made Kojiro an odd baby was the only thing to get him to calm down and not whine was this abnormally large, long sword that the old man kept, but wondered who would even want to master a heavy sword like this. And we see this infant cuddling with this sword, pretty much declaring with his will, "This is my sword." Eventually, the old man named Jisai had to find a way to nurture Kojiro. So he went to find a home with a mother so he could breastfeed Kojiro. And he began to doubt his ability to take care of Kojiro. And we find out this man that sent the letter was named Sasaki. And Jisai was too burdened with grief and sorrow to take care of something so innocent. So he dropped Kojiro back off at the house that he found. And he abandoned him. And he even tried to throw the sword into the ocean, but he quickly regretted and retrieved it once again. And he kept hearing phantom cries of Kojiro. And he checked for a baby that was no longer there. And it finally clicked how much he needed Kojiro. And it's the only light in his life now. And so he quickly went back to the house to retrieve Kojiro. And he vowed to never abandon him again. Only to shortly abandon him again. And he gives up. And he gets him back. And this cycle repeats over and over and over again for a while, until the surrounding people in the village helped when they could. And eventually Kojiro was 3 years old. And he seemed a bit odd to Jisai because he hasn't said a single word. It wasn't until his old student Idosai showed up as a surprise because he was in the area that we discovered Kojiro is actually a deaf child. And Jisai had no idea and did test this theory, and it was in fact true. And he was so sorrowful and felt so pathetic, he started to cut down the ocean itself out of frustration of being a horrible parent. But that very same act of using the sword and automatically using his proper form and swings, Kojiro was absorbing every single second of this without Jisai knowing. So, from Kojiro's perspective, he's learning how to use a sword despite Jisai's intense resolve to protect Kojiro from that. It seems that Kojiro only wants the way of the sword, with that way being the only thing that calms and excites him. After a while, Kojiro and that sword became one. And he played with the sword every day until one day the monk that started Musashi's journey became a vagabond. He visited Kojiro as well and quickly learned he was deaf and had a love for the way of the sword. And to protect the boy in the monk's eyes, he used the same sword to cut the boy, to show him that same sword he loves and plays with could cause his own death. And Kojiro was crying at first from a pain, but he stopped shortly after. And still, despite that, he chose the sword still. Meanwhile, Jisai decided the only thing he knew was the sword. In order to make money to support Kojiro, he returned to the way of the sword as an instructor. We see in Kojiro's interest, Jisai put up the long sword Kojiro loved, and Kojiro lashed out in every way he could to show Jisai how much he loved his sword. And he didn't want to separate from it ever. But the only word Kojiro understood to show Jisai was the word sword. But to Jisai, he wanted Kojiro to have a normal life and to not die recklessly to the sword or turn out like this useless old man such as himself. In his own eyes, but none other, this ever stopped Kojiro. As he was growing up, he chose a large log to use for training and to become a Tarzan-like boy in his teenage years, catching fish with his mouth and adapting quite well to being deaf. So well, in fact, even the other teenagers in the area tried to bully him. And they didn't treat Kojiro as an equal. They teased him for being dirty, poor, and deaf. A child's honesty could be the biggest asset or liability if they do not know what they do. We also see foreshadowing of an old man that's a pervert and taking advantage of a young woman only because a long time ago he saved a village from bandits. Trying to ransack their town, they tolerate his behavior, but some of the citizens want a revolution to happen, and soon. And the way the author is portraying Kojiro, he will be the person to take this guy out, perhaps his very first kill. Meanwhile, we see Jisai is confronted by an elder of the village with the pervert old dictator to test his skills, and he determined he was good enough to at least challenge the old man. And the way the old man saw it is as if he fails, that's fine. Or if he succeeds, that's fine too. It's a win-win for them. When we see Kojiro, he was being challenged by Tenki, an arrogant kid pursuing strength, and found out very quickly that Kojiro is the real deal, and he beat him up a lot. He used Kojiro for training. Kojiro leaped at the opportunity to challenge Tenki because he was never in a duel before or fought another person. So it was a learning experience and a whole lot of fun at that. The defeat was so real and one-sided, Kojiro got the hothead, arrogant kid to submit and ask to be taught by Kojiro himself. So as Tenki and Kojiro became more acquainted and grew stronger by the sword, Tenki quickly realized Kojiro was loved by the ladies and has special treatment, the opposite of Tenki, where he gets beat up defending Kojiro to his older brother, because they both want to avenge their father, but they are too weak. Tenki's father tried to overthrow Master Fudo, the old man that's ruling their village, but he failed. Jisai's resolve was becoming sharper each day, as he wants to throw away his old life and he just wants to be a father and nothing else. Despite the village needing the help of a strong swordsman, but once Jisai laid eyes on Master Fudo, he was consumed with fear and doubt, and all hope seemed to be lost until Jisai said he would kill Master Fudo tonight. The resolve he showed was only because he could relate to the man potentially losing his daughter to Master Fudo, because he has a son now, and he wouldn't let anything happen to Kojiro, even if he has to become a monster. He hated, and he wanted to slowly wither away. He would do it to save Kojiro. So at this point, we have Jisai that has the resolve to kill Fudo, but his fear didn't disappear, while, in the other hand, the very person he's trying to save is the same person that's going to attack Fudo himself. With his friend Kojiro has no idea his father is going to try to kill Fudo, and Jisai has no idea that Kojiro is about to risk his life. Once Kojiro and his friend made it to Fudo's house, there was a fire that lured them out, and once he realized he was being ambushed, he wakes up into the fire to get his sword, probably the only thing that this guy will do. The first one to strike was Tenki, and it did not land. Fudo dodged and flipped him. Even though he is a monster, he doesn't want to kill a kid. But he has no problem torturing, which is even worse. Kojiro, watching his friend get hurt, triggered him to attack Fudo, cutting off his arm. And this being Kojiro's first time he cut somebody, Jisai was scared, stopping on the way to Fudo, but what changed his urgency was hearing Kojiro yell. So his fatherly instincts kicked in, and now he has the resolve to finish this once and for all. Meanwhile, Kojiro is pretty much frozen after cutting off Fudo's hand, while Fudo was recovering fast and stopped the bleeding quickly, and he even managed to take the sword from Kojiro. And with both kids defenseless and feeling hopeless, none other than Jisai showed up to attack Fudo with no fear at all, with the battle being very rough and barbaric, actually. But we see Jisai push through the pain as he was almost cut through, and relying on muscle memory and his old lifestyle to finish what his son Kojiro started. In the aftermath of that battle, we see the village cheering and thanking Jisai. Kojiro, on the other hand, had a different reaction to seeing someone die. He took the sword and slashed at the dead body on the ground with glee and joy. In an act of discipline, Jisai had to smack the sword out of Kojiro's hand, and he slapped him. Jisai was terrified Kojiro would turn into a monster if he wasn't careful. The village was now offering Jisai a new home and anything he needed after recovery. They declined humbly, and him and Kojiro went back to their home, with dozens and dozens of people now knowing he's a real swordsman, not just an old man. So, a year later, we see the dojo is active and filled with youthful young men that want to be strong to protect themselves and the people they love. Kojiro seemed to not be a part of it because Jisai doesn't want to teach him the way of the sword, to try to prevent him from that life of regret. We do see that Kojiro and Tenki are still sparring, and even though Tenki is getting training, he still can't land an attack on Kojiro, no matter how hard he tries. And then at that night and morning, Kojiro humbled himself to ask Jisai to train him, but he kept getting denied. And sometimes Kojiro attacked Jisai to force him to train him, but gets knocked back pretty effortless. And after a while of being denied, he started doing image training on fighting Fudo over and over and over again. Kojiro did continue to attack Jisai in different ways, and sometimes straightforward, sometimes a sneak attack. The funny thing is the very thing Jisai was trying to prevent was the exact thing he was cultivating. It was actually a strong swordsman, and this keeps happening for a while until we see Jisai having gray hair now, and Kojiro seems to be in his mid to late teens now, so I'll say it's been 5 years past. And it seems we are all around the same time of the Sekigahara War, with soldiers going to battle, and Tenki wanted to join them and prove his skills on the battlefield. Despite this, his will wanting that he simply isn't strong enough. And even though he is the strongest of Jisai's disciples, that's only because Kojiro isn't technically a student. But it is still much stronger than Tenki, and he can't land an attack, not a single one, on Kojiro, even after years of training together. And when it comes to Jisai and Kojiro, the irony of Jisai's will being the hope that Kojiro would give up the sword through defeating him and crushing him, his will, but it only makes Kojiro stronger and more intrigued to keep learning and gaining experience. We find out that it's been 10 years since Kojiro was found by Jisai, and the strongest disciple of Jisai returned and was pleased to see Kojiro gain proper training in his eyes. Even though we know his very act of trying to discourage Kojiro, but in reality that's keeping him striving to be the strongest. Jisai's strongest disciple, Idasai, was hell-bent on seeing Kojiro's potential become fruitful, telling Jisai straight up, Kojiro is a tiger, and he needs to be on the battlefield. Despite Jisai's will of trying to protect Kojiro, to prove this fact, Idasai attacked Kojiro and gave him a little bloodlust and intensity, and Kojiro attacked Idasai like a wild beast, proving his point all the more. And it seems while Idasai was chilling by the fire, some swordsmen showed up looking for him. But at that exact same time of Idasai being ambushed, Kojiro showed up. And that tension is crazy. Idasai is making it clear that he wants Kojiro to act on his instincts and attack them, but Kojiro isn't motivated just yet. Or maybe he's thinking about his father and how he reacted when he acted on that impulse before he was smacked for it. So to give him a little push, he provoked them all by writing their skill level on their chests, and also himself, to show Kojiro he has much heights to climb, and it's okay to strive for strength, no matter what. But while Kojiro is in a trance of his own of seeing Idasai dominate the other 5 swordsmen with his aura alone, and not only that, he commands them to kill each other. These swordsmen are from the Yoshiaka school. They are not weak by any means, but even though these men came there to defeat Idasai, they ended up only wanting to impress him. And after the first duel ended, Kojiro picked up the blade and attacked one of the men, spilling his guts, and not even caring one bit. Idasai set up this entire battle royale to see Kojiro's skill, and after witnessing his lack of care, of danger, of ignorance of it, he knew immediately that Kojiro won't live long as a swordsman like that. The 4 remaining men was petrified of Kojiro, seeing his boy slice open a man and smiling about it. It sent chills down their spines, and we see from Kojiro's point of view, his only experience dueling someone was with the old man named Fudo, and he was a cynical old man. So with that being his only reference point, isn't the best to understand the way of the sword, and actually attracts value to human life, and not just to be a walking sandbag. And this lesson was going to be taught to him the hard way, because right now, the only thing that he was when he faced death is curiosity. And that is a bad place to be with a child. That's like a child wanting to touch a rattlesnake with no fear or concern. So Idasai himself joined the fray and finished off the guy that was bleeding out in front of Kojiro. And he stabbed Kojiro in the leg and pushed him to feel fear, and a lesson that having no fear, you would die early as a swordsman. But once Kojiro understood the assignment, he was ready to battle with the current knowledge now of understanding death, pain, and fear. With this path and still loving every second and smiling along the way, this baffled his opponents and thrilled Idasai. However, Kojiro's opponent's fault is his honor. He can't seem to gather his thoughts on winning. He's only concerned with his personal issues, not knowing his place in this world, comparing it to his stellar older brother that his father gave everything to, without a second thought. So even though this man has no self-esteem and constantly relying on the name of his father, was faced with a deaf boy that could not even know who he is. The only thing he does know about himself is his honor, so he injured himself to be on equal terms with Kojiro before they continue their duel. We see from Denichiro, his comrade, that he doesn't have the killer instinct like his big brother. He's a softie, so he had to injure himself to get to that state of bloodlust. A bit extreme, but necessary. We see also Kojiro and Denichiro is going back and forth. There isn't really much progress being made because Kojiro is still handling the blade like he does a stick. But through error, he caught on quickly to the difference and made adjustments to cut Denichiro down properly. The next few sequences isn't much about the duel, but more about the mental state of the 2 young swordsmen that are both blossoming because of the death match. Denichiro is finding his way to the sword and coming to an understanding of his power, which is his passion. Meanwhile, Kojiro is finding his way of fighting with this being a real deathmatch. He can understand and learn from not like the time when he was 9 and sliced off the old man's hand. One thing did remain for Kojiro: the curiosity of cutting and putting your life on the line for the way of the sword, and diving in deeper in his gleeful approach towards combat, and not shrinking in fear or losing or facing death. After the duel, Kojiro was victorious, and he did not kill Denichiro. They both retreated to have their wounds taken care of. And we find out that Denichiro from the start of the exchange had a lifetime of bonding with Kojiro through the sword. They knew each other deep as desires. They felt each other's passion and experience in that death match. They became one in a sense, and they both felt that same connection. The sad part here is Jisai knows that Kojiro must leave him, He chose the sword clear as day, and he will not abandon the sword, even if it is safer that way. So as Kojiro leaves with Idosai to chase the way of the sword, he must leave behind the men that raised and loved him. With hurt in Kojiro's eyes, and Jisai deeply, but it's a goodbye for now. If Kojiro survives, and it's only the very thought of Kojiro's demise that terrifies Jisai. But if he understands Kojiro's potential, and even though he never wanted to train him, he ended up doing just that. The irony of it all, he prepped him to go right down the path of the sword, and finding Idosai was the light at the end of the tunnel. Kojiro's true calling to become one with the sword, despite all the risk and disadvantages he may have. So when him and Idosai set out their journey, Kojiro came across a couple of men that wanted to rob him, and it turned out exactly how you thought it would with their defeat. Stating your name before battle was custom, and since Kojiro couldn't do that, Idosai made a banner for him to carry around, stating that he's the strongest swordsman, long with his name, so there's no confusion, and actually to antagonize men. And that worked out pretty well because they ran into each other. They ran into another group of men that claimed to be the strongest martial artists. And Idosai knocked him out easily, and after an hour or so, the man woke up and sought out Kojiro and Idosai for a rematch. But this time he had to fight Sasaki before a rematch with Idosai. And only after a short exchange, Kojiro lost interest quickly. Such an insult, man. Such an insult. But later on, when Kojiro was having dinner, he had a swordsman that walked straight on in his way into their lodge, and he demanded a fight. Being provoked by the banner outside, the man boasted about the men he defeated that claimed the same thing, and he was ready to lose his life. So when him and Kojiro began their duel, he didn't mind using a real sword, and he was cut down instantly, guys. Instantly. But he was happy dying this way. In his point of view, he lived a good life. So later on, we see Kojiro training to himself and was followed by the boy that's trying to learn from Kojiro. And we see Kojiro imagining he's attacking Idosai. If I was a betting man, I would say Kojiro imagines defeating Idosai as his benchmarker. Every single time the boy quickly realized that Kojiro is putting his life on the line every time he fights, his resolve is immense. He compared it to him, in which is why Sasaki doesn't even see him as a sparring partner, let alone a warrior. Now, since I brought up the word warrior, we see Musashi in the battlefield, complaining how he didn't take the head of a general while being surrounded by dead warriors. Musashi was so unsatisfied, he walked up to the group and asked which side was they on, and he was fully prepared to take them out on the spot, having a really animalistic energy to himself, like a starving beast in a man. And right on cue, reinforcements showed up, and Kojiro was excited at the chance to use his sword. But compared to Musashi, that excitement meant nothing, because Musashi was hungry, and he literally leapt at the chance to kill. He's a beast that haven't eaten in days, and he sees a whole meal in front of himself. Kojiro never seen someone this ferocious before, and he wasn't scared of it, but he was intrigued. We see the different fighting styles, where we have Musashi being a blunt force brute, aggressive wild beast, and Kojiro using precision and grace. Both of them are lethal, but on the total opposite side of the spectrum of combat preference. It's a beautiful sight to see. Indeed, perhaps more like brothers that never met each other. It's always interesting to see how the other soldiers or warriors react to Kojiro's presence and eyes. They think he's innocent and they underestimate him, or it's the opposite, and they think with his pure eyes he sees right through them and he sees their weaknesses. What a horrifying predicament to be in as a fighter or a warrior. But as the battle was coming to an end, Idosai stepped in to discard of the men trying to snipe them from the woods. In Idosai's mind and philosophy, guns are dishonorable and weak, and he disposed of the men very quickly. After the Sekigahara battle, we see some refugees that lost their village. The Lord in the war, they lost the women, the children, So they know right off the bat that these men have nothing to lose because they lost everything already. And they are searching for their lord, and they will cut down anybody that's in their way. When we see Kojiro in the group again, Kojiro is lost in thought, and Idosai remembers his conversation with Jisai, where he was asked to take care of Kojiro, and the only thing he promised was that he would take him through what he went through. Real combat. It's the only thing he knows how to live by, is by allowing Kojiro to become himself. So when these refugees start attacking, it's a bloodbath. They have no skill. They are normal men, but the malice they hold towards swordsmen is palpable. They blame them for every misfortune they suffered, and their loved ones and everything they love. The blood is on their hands, and it's as simple as that. And Idosai simply wants to throw Kojiro to the wolves and hopes he survives like he did. For the rest of the night, Kojiro will be hunted down, and he must fight for his life, or he will lose it. So at this point, Kojiro is exhausted in all ways. No food, no water, no sleep. But he must continue to fight for his life in a way that he never had before. But even though Kojiro is at a major disadvantage, he still executes his moves with such precision and skill, you wouldn't know he was exhausted. His willpower to live will be his greatest advantage while he tries to survive the night from these bloodthirsty men. Battle after battle after battle, crippled, days on end, Kojiro was brought to his knees, desperate for water and food. He drank from a well that was tampered by the enemies as a last-ditch effort to make whoever drinks it suffer. And as Kojiro was puking and feeling regret and fear, he calls out to his father Jisai. The only words he has ever said was his father's name. He's reflecting on all the times Jisai tried to stop him and prevent this life for him. Kojiro wept and thought of the peace he took for granted. And he chose his life, and he has to face everything that comes with it. As he looks in the face of his next enemy, this next enemy is much different. Though he has no bloodlust and he's a veteran warrior, the only thing going through this man's head is making sure his brothers stay alive and they make it back to their lord. Against odds like this, Kojiro is struggling to try and sustain the will to stand, let alone be in active combat. The entire circumstances around the battle of Sekigahara caused thousands of casualties, and the families and the villages of the men that were slaughtered was affected the most. Being on the run and unable to return home, it creates a desperate situation for all, and it leads down the same road when despair like that enters, and that road is death. So while Kojiro was coming up with a plan to protect his arm, to get his sword back, we see how the old man perceived Kojiro. He sees beauty in his will and understands Kojiro on a spirit level, because he was the same with the sword, and he knows instinctively that the sword chooses Kojiro. No matter the sword or circumstance, Kojiro is special, even more so because he is deaf and mute. But that didn't stop him from finding a way to survive and thrive as a swordsman. In the death of the old man, his comrades, his sons, his everything was there to see him die. Only if they knew he was content with his death and never enjoyed and connected with an opponent before in his life. That seemed to be the trend when a warrior faces Kojiro. They have a lifetime of connection from trying to kill each other. It's the most beautiful thing they can ever even imagine. They will never understand unless you're in the path of the warrior. So even without a weapon, Kojiro was a threat. Even while on the brink of collapse, Kojiro was a threat. He was unwavering. These men sensed this is Kojiro, and despite their mentor figure dying before their very eyes, one of them, the youngest, couldn't help but be gleeful and smile at the chance to fight Kojiro, and is thinking in his head how much he's ready to fight, but at the very same time his head is filled with thoughts when it should be empty. And because he was so inexperienced and lacked focus, Kojiro seized the moment and sliced his throat open and killed him in one shot. The last man went into a flashback Think of all he had before seeing his little brother die, before his eyes by Sasaki Kojiro, the same man that killed his mentor right in front of his eyes. The pain this man endures, the amount this man has lost in a matter of a couple minutes is immeasurable. The past few days for Kojiro has caused him to blossom into a real warrior and swordsman, facing death over and over and over again, and having a gleeful look on his face with a mountain of corpses on his soul and spirit. And despite that fact, he still has the joy of a child. Truly terrifying, guys. As the two men stared each other down, they was having a whole conversation without saying much. They spoke through their zeal and swords. It was truly magnificent, as they both know they could cut each other down in one strike if they moved wrong. The excitement was too much for Kojiro. He started to jump and leap around and dancing with pure joy of all the connections he formed, all the battles he had, and all the love he received. He couldn't contain himself any longer and started acting like a child on Christmas. One of the men can't understand Kojiro, how he could be happy and gleeful after killing so many people. He is used to normal swordsmen that have honor and respect, perhaps even a little fear, but not this. But both Kojiro and Kun are happy beyond belief and almost kills each other multiple times over and over, yet they still have a smile on their faces, and they are elated in the experience of putting their entire existence on the line. And during this deadly exchange, both fighters got faster and reached higher and higher heights. As a result of this battle, Kun is having the time of his life, because he never faced a man like Kojiro before, so pure in his devotion to the sword, and him being dead was not a handicap but a blessing, because he could fully devote his being to his body and learning without any distractions. So him being dead was actually an advantage to Kojiro, and the outside world is truly understanding that the only person that is invincible under the sun is Sasaki Kojiro.
NES.